was a Spectrum user. I had a relative who worked for Clive Sinclair, and we had a Spectrum 48K, and I had the one before that as well, the ZX81, and so I was more of a Spectrum user. But the thing that excites me about this is that apparently the company that's responsible for this reinventing of this Commodore 64 is considering or looking at seriously a Amiga version as well. And having cut my computing teeth with the Commodore Amiga range of computers, is certainly a project, or hopefully be a product that I'll be very, very interested in. So that's a bit of good news if that comes along. It'd be nice to see the Amiga.
They just try to put the good use to they have the trademarks, and if they can call something Amiga or Commodore, they at least have the crowd of people who have this nostalgic yearning to. I don't really know what the worth of the trademark is, but I don't even think that they need to do much more than just stick some label on it, make it look similar, and maybe be able to run the old games or something. But
now, what would be good?
It's really a Linux box in many ways.
I mean, what would be very nice is if the Amiga version of it does make an appearance and somebody does actually install Windows onto it, and maybe even installs Windows Vista, and they can compare Workbench 1.3 to Windows Vista or Windows 7, and actually see what Amiga users were using in the early 90s, and compare that to what's supposed to pass as an operating system platform today in Windows. I mean, the things that Microsoft touts as being great features, we were running very similar things in the early 90s. I remember in 92, certainly all the things that Microsoft Windows offers were available to me as an Amiga user. And whilst obviously we can say the same about Linux as well, Linux isn't pushed to be some sort of pioneer or spearhead of desktop computing. So it'll be a very interesting history lesson for people who never use an Amiga to see how primitive it wasn't at that time. And certainly my happiest memories of computing were the Amiga years, because the machine was just such a tight system, such a decent system to use. And I think if lessons had been learnt by certain other companies, we wouldn't be in a state we are today with things like Windows Vista coming out. And
worse things I think now with consoles. I had this conversation just a while ago. What is the gaming console? It's just a PC with limited functionality. And
yes.
The functionality has been limited instead of being open, instead of actually being able to do more with these things.
Or you could say focused if you want to talk in PR terms.
Yeah.
Focused.
Focus sounds better, I suppose.
The reality is limited, but the PR word, I suppose, would be focused. It's a focused piece of hardware. And funny enough, just as a very quick offshoot, it brings up this whole thing of the other OS for the Sony PlayStation 3 and the big hoo-ha, or the supposed big hoo-ha when it was taken off. I mean, I certainly didn't buy my PlayStation 3 for the fact that I could stick Linux on it, because I've got Linux on my desktop, which is what I prefer to surf, to do whatever I want to do on. I see no benefit in having it on the television downstairs in the living room.
I should mention the other OS thing. You say other OS. Actually, it's interesting. I think there is a company with a similar name. But anyway, what happened in Finland, I think there was a ruling, which I quote from memory. It says that Sony will have to perhaps compensate something like €100 or $1.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
It's nice that Linux is not so free anymore, especially when you request from a company. They can compensate you for 100. It's nice to know that the free operating system is worth so much.
But I mean, the thing was, it did puzzle me why specifically people would want it on there in the first place. I mean, yes, it was great. Don't get me wrong. It was a nice little novelty to have. But if I want to do serious desktop computing, I don't want.
You could. They crippled it on purpose. The graphics. What's it called? Well, they have different infrastructure, obviously, for things like games and stuff. So the way they work with graphics and the cores and everything is a bit different. But even if you had the Yellow Dog Linux 6 or 5 running on the thing, you couldn't get very high resolution, so you couldn't quite use Office suites. And they didn't try to make it into a swappable kind of PC/game console thing. You just say, well, you could slap things on it. You could use it in a really crap resolution on the TV screen. But if they wanted to, they could make it just a very, very, very capable Linux box. But it was never designed that way.
And this was the big mistake by Sony, I think, because I think if Sony had developed and said, right, we're going to put Linux on this, you've got the choice to to have it on there if you wish, and give people the facility to actually use it as a proper desktop PC, which there's no reason why you can't. I mean, physically, in terms of size and in terms of shape, if you want to be petty, it's just like a desktop PC. CPU, you can have your keyboard, you can have it plugged into a small monitor, and you could offer all the benefits of having a proper desktop operating system and the Sony PlayStation franchise and the games that are developed for that, which would have made a killer desktop for the majority of mainstream users.
I think they were quite concerned when people could take dumps of the CDs and Blu-rays onto the partition. Maybe this is one of the reasons they actually tried to disable it proactively.
But then that was proved to be...
People get very close to kind of decoding the things and actually using it as a so-called, piracy machine.
Yeah, but then again, you see, the average user never would get close to the sort of that level. And in any case...
They only have to go to the Script Kiddies website, George Hawks, and just download some script that's doing that.
But then in any case, it was busted open anyway, and if we look at the recent PlayStation Network hack, now they took away Linux, citing security issues as to the reason, well, one of the reasons why they're going to remove it from the system. But yet now, when Linux isn't about, and thank God it wasn't, because you can guarantee that Linux would have got the blame for this latest PlayStation Network hack, it's made no difference whatsoever. As we've seen even with small consoles like the Nintendo DS, the small handheld machines, the piracy, where there's a will, there's a way, and you're never ever going to sample it, because there's always some clever person who's ready to develop a means around this. And with the DS, I think it was the R5s, or was it R4? R4 it might be. And with every console, with the Super Nintendo, you had the Magicoms and the copying devices, Super Disc Doctor V64 for the Nintendo 64. So people circumvented any protections, and they couldn't fight it if people are determined. I mean, the PlayStation, the original one, was probably the most famous of all, where simply chipping it, you could play copied titles. So I think they made a big mistake. I think if Sony had marketed different, they could have cornered a nice little niche there for the mainstream user who wants a simple, easy-to-use machine that plays games and doesn't have to worry about upgrading.
As well, HDMI and everything, yeah.
And then you wouldn't have to worry about upgrading graphic cards like you have to do with the latest PC titles. I mean, running a PC game, a Windows binary game, is a nightmare if you're on top of your...
One issue they might have with one of the things I think they wanted to impede, or was impeded as a consequence, it's hard to know what the motivations and considerations were, but the places which were using the PS3 as a computational server, they suffered a great deal because these things were basically bricked for them. So unless they start playing games of these things, they just had lots of these machines, which would be...
Didn't the US military buy a whole cluster of these?
Yeah.
I thought so.
And one of the so one of the things that was you go ahead.
No, I was just going to add. I was just saying. I thought I'd read somewhere that the US military bought a cluster of PlayStation 3s. I would assume that they would be out of the firmware upgrades loop.
Yeah.
I would assume that's part of their contract with Sony.
I suppose so. One of the issues they might have, even if Sony doesn't sell at a loss anymore, even if they don't actually suffer a loss every time you buy a PlayStation 3, they might in the future want to do that under the assumption that people will buy some games and pay commissions to Sony. And if people can buy these machines and will have compelling reasons to buy these machines to be used as desktops or servers, then Sony cannot do that because they could kind of get screwed. In the sense that they could be giving blades for free. Actually, it's funny I say blades because because the processors being used are Cell, which are kind of similar to the blades that IBM has been making. But if they give these things out for free, they give these really expensive processors for free. Not for free, but they actually sell it at a loss, which means that people will be able to buy below the production cost. Then it could be exploited. It could limit the maneuvers and the strategy that PlayStation people have against the Nintendo Wii and this other console, which seems to sell okay in the States, I suppose, but not so well in other countries. I think it's XB something. It's the X matters. It just kind of.
Well, I think like I say, I think I will always maintain the opinion that Sony made a mistake with the marketing of their console and that they should have kept the other OS. Because, I mean, if you look back through computing history at all the machines that really were popular with the home user and with the mainstream, the Commodore Amiga, what advantage did that have over the PC at the time? Well, nothing in theory, because although it had a very good chipset, the Amiga wasn't particularly good at 3D games. At the time of the Amiga,